2024's Transformers 1 is one of the most disappointing box office bombs we've seen over the past few years. Despite positive reactions from casual viewers, fans of the series, and critics, it failed to break even at the box office, and we will likely never see a follow-up. This led many to ask the question of why did it flop? In this video, I'm going to attempt to answer that question, as well as take a look at the history of the film and offer up some of my personal thoughts on the project. The inception of Transformers 1 can actually be traced back to 2015, soon after Transformers Age of Extinction was released. Paramount Pictures put writer and producer Akiva Goldsman in charge with creating a writer's room to create future ideas for the Transformers franchise. In May of 2015, future Ant-Man and the Wasp screenwriters Andrew Barrer and Gabriel Ferrari were added to the team as writers, who began developing an idea of an animated prequel which would focus on the Autobot-Decepticon conflict which began on the planet Cybertron. And in August of 2017, it was officially announced to be in the works. Big news came in 2020, when former Pixar animator and filmmaker Josh Cooley was brought in to direct the film, as well as oversee the script written by Barrer and Ferrari. Industrial Light and Magic, who provided the visual effects for the previous live-action Transformers films, would return to animate this one. At the 2023 CinemaCon, the title of Transformers 1 was officially revealed, as well as the voice cast. Chris Hemsworth would play Orion Pax, aka Optimus Prime, Brian Tyree Henry would play D-16, aka Megatron, Scarlett Johansson would play Alita, Keegan-Michael Key would play Bumblebee, and John Hamm would play Sentinel Prime. The budget for this film was initially reported by Variety and Deadline to be around $75 million. However, a later report by Animation Magazine placed the budget at double that price at $147 million. Personally, I'm more inclined to believe that first figure since Variety and Deadline are pretty reliable sources within the industry, but it's up to you on what you want to believe. Also, just for comparison, you can make 9 to 19 hoodwinks for the same price. But of course, this isn't factoring in marketing, distribution, or the theater's cuts. If we're going to go off the rule of thumb of around 2 to 2.5 times the original budget in order to break even, this movie would need to make over $150 million for that lower figure, or over $300 million for that higher figure. Leading up to its release, estimates had the opening weekend gross at $30 to $40 million. But unfortunately, it would not live up to these hopes. Transformers 1 hit theaters on September 20th of 2024, having a disappointing opening weekend gross of $24 million. It came in second in the box office, just shy of dethroning Beetlejuice by $1 million, which was on its third week in cinemas. Domestically, the movie would make $59 million, and overseas it would rake in $70 million, for a total worldwide gross of $129 million. This, unfortunately, would make it a box office flop, both with the smaller budget figure and the bigger one. Even though this would not live up to the financial expectations, it did get a good response from both fans and critics. Transformers 1 currently holds a certified fresh 89% critic and 97% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes. It also boasts a 7.6 out of 10 on IMDb and a 3.8 out of 5 on Letterboxd. As a whole, it seems like the movie hit pretty well for the people that actually saw it. So this invites the question of what went wrong that resulted in this film failing to turn a profit at the theater. When it comes to the commercial failure of Transformers 1, I think it was a case of death by 1,000 cuts. It wasn't one big reason, but rather a bunch of small ones which combined resulted in a bomb. The first cut I want to look at is the marketing, which Paramount Pictures is notoriously bad at when it comes to animated feature films. The trailers for this sold a completely different vibe than what the movie actually is. In reality, it's a family film that appeals to both fans of the series and newcomers, as well as kids and adults. But you wouldn't guess that from the trailer, as it has very kid-focused humor that was pretty cringy. Just as a personal anecdote, I remember watching this trailer for this film numerous times and always rolling my eyes because it looked so bland. But once I actually saw the movie, I really enjoyed myself and was surprised because I'm not a Transformers fan at all. If I knew what this movie was actually like, I would have seen it in theaters and been championing it. From the trailers, it was sold as a lighthearted kids film with little action, which contrasted with what the brand has been for the past decade and a half with the over-the-top explosive action found in the Michael Bay films. And to make matters worse, kids these days just aren't as crazy about Transformers as they were 15 years ago. A lot of the Transformers fanbase are people who were kids when the first live-action film came out in 2007 and then grew up with the Michael Bay films as they progressed through the late 2000s to early 2010s. And those fans are in their 20s and 30s, or even older if you want to factor in the fans of the OG cartoons. Speaking of which, we need to consider the state of the Transformers brand at this point in time, which will require us to look back on the previous films. Michael Bay's first Transformers film came out in 2007 and was a big financial success and was mostly a hit with fans. That of course led to 2009's Revenge of the Fallen, which was a bit more divisive but made even more money. Next, we got the financial peak of the franchise with Dark of the Moon, but this was yet again divisive among the general audience. It's pretty much the same story with 2004's Age of Extinction, where it was divisive but made over $1 billion. The Transformers franchise at this point in time was very much like the Jurassic World movies, where they would always get bad reviews, but the general audience ate them up and they always made bank. But we see a major shift happen with 2017's The Last Knight, which the brand would never truly recover from, as it seems like audiences got tired of seeing the same thing over and over, as it got bad reviews and raked in hundreds of millions of dollars less than the previous entry. In fact, The Last Knight lost Paramount an estimated $100 million since it cost so much to make and market. We would get a quick break from these Michael Bay Transformers movies with the prequel, Bumblebee, which would get positive reviews, but wouldn't put up the biggest box office numbers when compared to the franchise's early entries. And then we got the final nail in the coffin with 2023's Rise of the Beasts, which, although wasn't directed by Michael Bay, definitely still copied his style. This film earned the worst box office of the franchise, mediocre reviews, and signaled that the height of this series' popularity was long over. We just got too much of the same thing back to back, the property lost all its momentum after The Last Knight, and the franchise slowly decayed in the public's eye. To release an animated prequel film pretty much a decade after the franchise's peak, you couldn't rely on name recognition alone, and you would have to make audiences care about the brand once again, which Paramount obviously failed to do with the aforementioned poor marketing. I've also seen some people throw criticisms at the animation style, which they say looks a bit cheap, gives off a straight-to-streaming quality, and that the human faces bordered on the uncanny valley. While I don't fully agree with this take, I do understand the criticisms. Competition at the box office was also a major factor. Transformers 1 debuted 1 week before The Wild Robot came out, which is not only an animated family film, but is an animated family film about a robot. Transformers 1 would fall to third place in its second weekend after The Wild Robot debuted at number 1 with an impressive $35 million. The Wild Robot would then make over $300 million in the box office and would receive all kinds of praise from both critics and general audiences. All the positive word of mouth Paramount was hoping Transformers 1 would get was overshadowed by The Wild Robot. So now that we've explored a few reasons why this movie may have failed commercially, I would like to take the time and offer up some of my personal thoughts on the project. Before we dive into this movie, I would like to give a quick recap of the plot, which means spoilers ahead. Our story is set on the world of Cybertron, where these sentient robots live in a hierarchy based on whether they have a transformation cog that allows them to shapeshift into vehicles. Those without the cog are forced to work in the mines, and we focus on two of these miners, Orion Pax and D16. We follow these two best friends on their journey as they team up with other cogless robots and discover that the leader of Cybertron, Sentinel Prime, is actually a bad guy who betrayed Cybertron and gives all their energon to these other evil aliens. Sentinel Prime has also been taking a bunch of these transformation cogs away at birth to form this society where he's on top. Our heroes eventually get transformation cogs of their own, and they team up with some freedom fighters and miners to take down Sentinel Prime and his evil regime. Along the way, D16 slowly becomes evil, and a rift forms between him and Orion Pax. They both get upgrades and new names, with D16 becoming Megatron and Orion Pax becoming Optimus Prime. These two end up fighting each other towards the end of the story, and all the robots then split up into two different factions, the Decepticons led by Megatron, and the Autobots led by Optimus Prime. The movie ends here, with the filmmakers teasing the next exciting installment into the franchise, which we will likely never see. The end. Full disclosure, I've never been a fan of the Transformers series, and all that I've seen of the Michael Bay movies I have not enjoyed. So I was approaching this film as just your average theater goer, and I gotta say, I really liked it. The story in this movie is just awesome, and does a great job at explaining the lore to people like me who are unfamiliar with this world. I love how this film manages to explore the themes of class divide and the oppression of the working class without it feeling like it's dumbing it down or bluntly hitting you over the head. It strikes a good balance between those 2 points. But by far the best part about this movie is the relationship between Orion Pax and D16. They start out as best friends, but slowly over the film become mortal enemies. While you could argue that Megatron's turn to the dark side happened too fast, for a movie with an hour and 45-minute runtime, I thought it was executed as well as it could have been, given the circumstances. There were a handful of truly magnificent scenes where we saw D16's whole perception of the world shatter in front of him, and I'm not being hyperbolic when I call his villain arc Shakespearean. That scene in the cave, him standing up to Sentinel Prime, and the final showdown with Optimus Prime was all top-tier stuff. I was also a big fan of the action throughout the film. The race sequence, the fight between D16 and Starscream, and the fight between Megatron and Optimus Prime were all badass. You know what? Just the final act in general was so entertaining because it was pretty much just non-stop action the entire time. One part about this film that was really hit or miss was the voice cast. Some of it was good, but a lot of it came off as stunt casting and like they were just trying to get big names. Chris Hemsworth, Scarlett Johansson, and John Hamm I just didn't really care for, and I never felt like they inhabited the characters they were portraying. But on the other hand, Brian Tyree Henry was absolutely fantastic as D16/Megatron, and he was the major standout. And of course, a lot of the supporting cast was great, such as Steve Buscemi and Lawrence Fishburne. I was really split on Keegan-Michael Key's Bumblebee, who can be fun and silly at times, but also extremely annoying at others. And this leads into the humor as a whole. Sometimes I found the comedy in this film hilarious, but other times it strayed into what can best be described as Marvel humor. Those jokes that are just so easy and overdone that you can't help but roll your eyes. So basically all the ones we saw in the trailer. You know, the "he's right behind me, isn't he?" and the guys, we got company" type of jokes. You know it when you see it. But there were still a lot of good jokes I got a kick out of, which outweighed these bad ones. The first time I watched this movie back in 2024, I didn't really care for the animation style. However, on a rewatch, I actually liked it. I thought a lot of the character designs were really cool and fit for the style of action that this movie was going for. The only part I still don't like is how a lot of the characters have basically the same face, which was a weird choice. Finally, I appreciate how this movie was able to tell a standalone story, but still leave you wanting more and building up to a potential sequel. It's just a shame that a sequel will likely never happen, since this movie failed to break even. But that's all I need to say, and it's time to wrap it up. Through various factors such as poor marketing, competition at the theater, and the brand as a whole decaying in the public eye, Transformers 1 failed to break even at the box office and lost millions of dollars. However, it still managed to land with many of the people who saw it, and I feel as though we might see this film garner a cult following in the years to come. But what are your thoughts on Transformers 1? Have you seen it? How do you think it compares to the rest of the Transformers series? I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments. This has been Tom from Isenhart Productions, and thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next week. And here's a clue for next week's video.
Look, Hansel and Gretel! What the heck are the crumbs for?